What's up, guys? Brian Grossman here with Grossman Woodworking and DIY, and on today's video we're going to be turning one cedar fence picket into this cool little squirrel feeder Adirondack chair. So this is a cool little build. You're talking $3 or so in materials because it doesn't even quite use a whole fence picket. Or you can build this thing out of scraps. If you're like me and you got a lot of those fence picket scraps laying around, you can probably build it out of what you already have available. But either way, it's a fairly simple build, definitely an inexpensive one, but it's not one I would recommend for mass producing to sell. And I'll get into that at the end of the video, but it is a cool little build for yourself, for family, friends, that kind of thing. Put out in your yard and get some cool videos like this one. And I'm going to walk you through step by step exactly how to build it. So let's get started.
All right, so we start this build like we always do by sanding our materials, or sanding our cedar fence picket in this case, and getting it good and smooth and free of splinters. Then we move over to the miter saw to start on our cuts. We're going to cut 7 boards for this project, starting with the 12-inch piece. Then we're going to move to a 10-inch piece. Next up, we have another 12-inch piece, and we'll just use our original 12-inch piece to measure it out. Next up is an 8-inch piece. Then we'll be cutting 2 identical 4 1/4-inch pieces. And then we finish up our miter work by tilting the miter saw 10 degrees. And we're going to cut a 7 1/8 inch piece with that 10-degree bevel. Then we'll move over to the table saw, where we'll start ripping our 3/4 inch stock for this build. And we'll start with one of our 4 1/4 inch pieces and rip that into 6 3/4 inch strips. And as always, take your time and watch your fingers here. The next up is our 8-inch piece that again will rip into 6 3/4 inch strips. All right, that's all for our 3/4 inch strips. Now we're going to move our fence to 1 inch. And we'll double check that to make sure we're good on the fence. And then again, we'll start with our other 4 1/4 inch piece of wood. This time we'll be ripping it into 4 1-inch strips. Next up is our 12-inch board, and again we'll cut this into 4 1-inch wide strips. Then we need to move our fence over to 1.5 inches to make our 2 last cuts on the table saw for this. You should have 1 7 1/8 piece of board remaining, and we're going to cut 2 strips that are 1.5 inches wide. All right, next we're going to head back over to the miter saw. You need to turn it to 10 degrees, and we're going to cut a piece at 4 1/4 inches, or with that 10-degree miter. Then you can move the miter saw back to 0, flip around the piece you just cut, and cut off that second piece at 4 1/4 inches. And both of those pieces should have 10-degree miters on the end. Then you can take another one of the 12-inch strips and cut a 6 3/4 inch piece. Then with the remaining piece from that cut, turn your saw to a 45-degree bevel and just cut the piece in half. It doesn't have to be exact. Then bring it back up to 0 degrees. Put those two pieces together and cut them off at about 1.5 inches. It doesn't have to be exact, but about 1.5 inches is where I cut these. And watch your fingers cutting something that short. But you should end up with two pieces of wood like this.
All right, guys, when you get done with all your cutting, this should be everything you need to build this. And I'm going to run through kind of the cut list here real quick. I won't get into what each part is quite yet because you're going to hear all that during the build and I don't want to be repetitive. But full width, you should have a 12-inch piece, the one with the dog ears, and a 10-inch piece. For the 3/4 inch strips, you should have 6 that are 4 1/4 inches long, and you should have 6 that are 8 inches long. And then on your 1-inch strips, you're going to have the 2 little 1.5 inch pieces that you cut the 45s on the ends. You're going to have a 6 3/4 inch piece. You're going to have 4 that are 4 1/4 with square ends. And then you're going to have 2 that are 4 1/4 that have the 10-degree bevels on the ends. And then you're going to have 2 that are 12 inches long, and these will get cut down at the end. We'll worry about those later. And then you're going to have 2 that are, these are 1.5 inch strips, 7 1/8 inch long, and these are the ones that we cut the 10 degrees bevel on the end here, like that. And so that's everything you need to build this. Again, you'll see where these all go as we start building it, putting it together. And so with that, let's get started.
All right, we're going to start the build by building the frame for the seat. And we'll use 2 4 1/4 inch boards with straight ends and 2 4 1/4 inch boards with the 10-degree bevels on the ends. And we'll start with the beveled ends, putting some glue on those and attaching them to one of the straight end 4 1/4 inch boards. And that'll get a couple of 1-inch 18 gauge brad nails. Then we attach the other piece, 4 1/4 inch piece with the beveled end. So it should look like that. You can see the beveled end there. Then we flip it over and attach the remaining 4 1/4 inch board with the straight ends. And that's the frame to the seat. And with that together, we'll take our 6 3/4 inch wide, 4 1/4 inch long slats and attach those to the seat. And you'll start the first one flush with the front of the seat. And I just put one nail on each side of these. Then I go ahead and attach the back slat, again flush with the back of the seat. That way, once we have those in place, we can kind of figure out the spacing for the remaining boards. Now, you could certainly measure this and figure out exact spacing, even some kind of little jig to use to space them out, but I just do it by eyeball. Get them kind of spaced the way I want them, and then one by one I'll add glue and shoot a nail in each end. And And with the slats on, you now have kind of the base of your seat. Next up, we're going to put together the back of the seat. We'll be using 5 of the 8-inch pieces that are 3/4 inches wide. First, though, we need to head over to the miter saw because I forgot to cut mitered ends on 4 of these 5 back slats. So I set the miter saw at about 22.5 degrees and just cut off the tips of 4 of my slats. And you'll see why here in just a minute. Now with those 4 cut, we can start laying out the back for our chair with the one uncut board as the middle picket and then the other one's on the outside. And you can see those miters are kind of angled downward on each side from the middle there. To get the spacing at the top there, I just use scrap pieces of these cedar fence pickets. So that's about 5/8 of an inch. But I get those spaced out and then just kind of eyeball the height for each of these so it has kind of a natural arch to the back of the chair. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I just eyeball it to where I think it looks best. Then we'll take our 6 3/4 inch board, that are 6 3/4 inch long, 1 inch wide board. I'm marking it right in the middle, which would be 3 3/8, and that way I can visually keep that mark in the middle of my middle slat. And this is going to set about 2 7/8 from the bottom of those outermost slats. So I'll make sure I'm about 2 7/8 here in the middle. And what I'll do is go ahead and shoot 1 nail in this, and then I can make sure that both of my ends are about the same measurement. Then once you get that where you want it, then you can go ahead and shoot some brads into each of the 5 slats. Next up, we're going to need the remaining 3/4 inch piece that was 8 inches long. We're going to take it over to the miter saw, set it for a 10-degree miter, and we're going to cut this thing 5.5 inches from long tip to long tip. So cut a 10-degree miter, then flip it over and cut a 10-degree miter on the other end, and the angles should be opposite of one another. And then you can just put that piece on wherever it fits correctly with your back. It ends up being about 1 7/8 above the previous brace for me, but it's really not critical. It's just an extra bracing for your back slats there. It's really more decorative than anything. All right, and with that, we have our back of the seat assembled, and we can get that attached to the beveled end of the seat itself. And I'm going to go ahead and mark center of my base here, which will be 2 1/8, just so I can get it lined up with that middle slat of the back. And I'm going to line up those 2 outer slats of the back kind of with the bottom of the base of the seat. Again, I go ahead and put 1 nail in the center here so I can make sure my back is perfectly perpendicular to the seat. Then you can go ahead and shoot nails into the rest of your back slats. All right, with that part of the seat assembled, we'll go ahead and set that off to the side for a minute. And we're going to go ahead and put together the base for this whole feeder. And we'll use our 12-inch full width piece with the dog ears. I'm making a mark on the front at 1 inch. And I'm making a mark on the back at 1 5/16 of an inch. This mark on the back at 1 5/16 is where you want to drill your screw holes to hold the base on. Then you'll take your 10-inch full width piece, put some glue just above the 1-inch line that you marked on the front. And I bought these cheap 90-degree clamps off of Amazon that really help with little projects like these. So you want to line up the bottom of this 10-inch piece with your 1-inch line that you drew across the front. I'm going to put on my cheap little 90-degree clamps here. Again, make sure the bottom of that 10-inch board is in line with the 1-inch mark that you made. And once it is, we can go ahead and shoot those screws into the back. And I'm using 1-inch exterior grade construction screws for this. With that together, you can remove the clamps, wipe off any excess glue, and hey dummy, you can't mount the chair to the base yet until we put our legs on there. So next up, we're going to put our front legs on there, and we'll use the 2 remaining 1-inch pieces that are 4 1/4 inches long for the legs. Right now, I'm just using some extra pieces to support the base of the seat at the right height to mount those legs. So those legs should extend 1 1/4 inches below the bottom of the base of the seat, which is why I'm using 2 pieces of this 5/8 inch thick cedar fence picket to support the bottom of the seat while I attach the legs. With the front legs on, now we can attach the chair to the base. And I'm just eyeballing it here so the base of that seat is parallel to the base of the entire feeder. We're going to put some glue on that seat back support as well as on the bottom of the legs. And then set this thing onto the base. And again, just make sure my seat is parallel to the bottom of that base. Once I get it where I want it, I'm going to take my brad gun and shoot a few brads through the back of this base and into that back support of the seat. And then I'll also put nails through the bottom of the base into the legs of my seat. And it'd been nice if I'd actually got this in front of the camera when I did that. At this point, take your 1 1/2 inch piece with the 45-degree bevel on the end, and we're going to attach these to the top of the front legs there, where the top of that 1 1/2 inch piece is flush with the top of the leg. These just provide some additional support for your arm when you attach it. Then again, same thing on the other side. Make sure the top of the 1 1/2 inch piece is flush with the top of the arm. Then we need to put our rear legs on there, and we'll use the 2 remaining 12-inch pieces of 1-inch stock. And so we'll have to head back over to the miter saw. I'm going to put a 22.5-degree cut on the end. I don't have an exact measurement to give you here because it seems like each one of these turns out just a little different. So what I always do is just hold it up in place and see where it meets the bottom angle of the whole feeder base, and I mark that. And again, it'll just be still a 22.5-degree cut. If anything, make sure you cut this just a touch longer because it's a lot easier to kind of creep up to the right length than it is to have to start with a whole new piece. And in my case, it was just a touch too long. So I trim off just a hair here. And that put it right where it needed to be. Now, I'll flip the piece around and see if it's the same size for the other side. It's not always perfect, so don't just cut 2 identical pieces. In this case, I needed a piece just a touch longer for the other side. So I still used my first piece to line it all up, but I just didn't quite come to the blade before making my second cut. Unfortunately, I guessed right on the first try. Now with those cut, again, make sure I'm putting the right one in the right place here. I'll add a little glue to the side of the chair where the brace crosses it, as well as on the ends of the brace. And just put that in place. Shoot a couple brad nails through that rear leg into the seat, as well as where the rear leg attaches to the frame of the feeder. And I try to get one up front here as well to hold it into that front leg. Now just repeat the process for the other side. And with that, all we got left to do is put the arms on there. And of course, that'll be your two remaining pieces, the 1.5 inch wide by 7 1/8 inch long boards. And these have the 10-degree bevels on the back of them. So you want to make sure when you cut these arms out that you cut them opposite of one another, with the beveled ends on the thinner side of the arm. So they should be mirror images of one another. Now, fortunately, I have a template for mine after making several of these, but it's not that hard. You start out at 3/4 of an inch wide. That should come up about 1.5 inches before it widens out to a full 1.5 inches wide. And just get that drawn out on one of your boards. Then I'm just going to put these two boards together with the beveled ends on the same end, but turned opposite directions. And then I'm going to clamp them together to my workbench and use a jigsaw to cut them both out at the same time. Once I have them roughly cut out with the jigsaw, I'll use my Orbital sander to get them smoothed out. And again, I just hold them together when I do this so the shape stays consistent across both of the arm pieces. And then here's your finished product. Again, the narrow ends are the ones with the bevels, and they should be mirror images of one another. So now it's time to attach the arms to the chair. And as you can see here, that long end of the bevel is the top of the chair, or is the top of the arm. Put a little glue on the top of your front leg, as well as on the back of the arm, and glue it in place. And then I'm going to shoot a couple brads into the back of the arm. And about 3 brads into the top of the arm. And then you'll just repeat the process on the other side. Now there is one more step in the process before this thing's complete. We'll need to drill a few holes in this thing, including one hole in the middle of the platform near the front, and that's where my screw will go through that holds the corn cobs in place for the squirrels to feed on. And then I'm going to drill a hole at the top in the middle, and that's for mounting to a tree, and then I'll do the same thing at the bottom.
All right, guys, that wraps up our build on the squirrel feeder Adirondack chair. And like I said, it's a really cool piece. Everybody that has seen these, our friends and family, love them, just think they're the coolest things. Of course, they don't want to fork over a lot of money for them. And that's why I had in the YouTube thumbnail that don't waste your time, because I would not recommend. I just got done doing 6 of these for $20 a piece, and I would not do that again. I don't plan on selling any more of these. I may make one for a family member or friend or something that see it and like it, but otherwise, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze for me. Now, if you were going to make these in bulk, you could set up a jig. You could batch a lot of the slats and stuff and probably speed up the process. Maybe you could make it worthwhile selling these for 25, $30 a piece. But for me, it just isn't worth it. And I've got a huge list of things I want to build for you guys, so it just doesn't make sense to keep cranking these out. But I did enjoy the ones I built. I hope you did too. And I do encourage you to give it a try. At least build one for yourself, because it is a really cool little build. So until next time, guys, hey, keep making cool stuff. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, the little notification bell. And if you want to make a cool squirrel feeder picnic table, if you haven't seen that already, then there'll be a link to that over here, or maybe over here. I'm not sure, but it'll be somewhere here on the screen for you guys to check that out. And I hope you will. But with that, guys, we will see you on the next one.